the basics we can go back to them, but there's always ways of doing things more efficiently in Vectorworks. And I introduced the trim tool to today so that you can easily trim off objects. That works well when there might be just one thing we want to trim, but when we want to extend or trim multiple objects or multiple objects to a certain point, there's a way better way of doing that, and that's called the Connect Combine tool. So if I look over my basic tool palette, it's this little right angle with some grayed out tail extensions, okay? So if I select my Connect Combine tool, and if I hover over the shortcuts there, but my mouse is not, my mouse is really big at the moment. So you can see when I select that Connect Combine tool, my mode menus along the top, there's a few different options. So I can, that would be why. I can join two objects. So I can join them at a T. So if, for instance, this was shorter, I could then do my Connect Combine tool, Option L, and I can go from, I need to be conscious of what leg of the shape or arms I'm connecting. So I want to connect this line with this line, and it makes a T. Now, if I did the reverse and I went from that line to that line, it trims off that object. Okay? So I have to I want to connect this line to this line, and that makes it a T. If I also I could do this one to that one, and it extends that line all the way. Now, there's also this is the single object connect mode. There's a dual object connect mode. So if I wanted to, I'll just draw some lines, for instance. So here, if I'm doing that Connect Combine tool or Option L, I can go the T, it just extends, it just modifies and extends that one line to that bounding object, in this case a line. Now if I use the dual object connect mode, it's going to connect those two and trim that tail off. So you can see that I went from this line to this side of this line, and it connects those two and trimmed off that extension there. Now if I select this line first and then go to the left side, it's going to give me a different outcome, and it's going to connect those two and trim off the extension to the right. Now what I can do, I can also combine. So if I go back, redo. If I go back and I do this operation again, it gives me two separate lines. There's one line, there's another. If I select both of them, it says up in Object Info Palette 2 lines. Now, if those are 2 lines. Now, if I combine the lines or the shape, I use this Object Combine mode. And the same thing, I'm going to click my first object, and then in this case, I'll go to the right. It trimmed off the tail on the left, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it clearly, it created the 2 lines, but there's also, it applied this fill to this space in between those lines. And now if I select this object, it actually tells me I have a polygon. So because remember when we have lines, we can't apply fill to, they're not a shape, they're just a line. Whereas now I've started to create a shape. In this case, it only has 2 edges, and it's a polygon, but where that space that's been created by those 2 lines, there's a fill. I could, if I wanted to, I could close this shape, and it closes that shape for me, but in that case I don't. want to. If I, for instance, had a rectangle, or I drew a rectangle with 4 lines, I could, as one shape, I mean, I could select them and it says 4 lines in Object Info Palette. I could go in and create a rectangle using the rectangle tool over top, or I could use that Connect Combine mode tool and use the combine mode, and I could then combine all these shapes. And this case, it's covering that line, so I'm going to select it and send it back. Go back into my Connect Combine, and now I have a shape of a rectangle. It has a fill. There's no other lines behind because I've used those lines and combined them to make this shape. It says up on my Object Info Palette, I have a polygon. Okay, so these are all different ways of using the Connect Combine mode. So remember, that's that single object connect that extends one object and leaves the other one as is. There's the dual object connect that modifies both objects to connect them. There's the combined mode to combine those objects into a shape. And then there's this multiple object connect mode. So for instance, if I wanted to extend this joist to this line here, I could go in and I could select my line, and I could select each one of those lines and use the scaling mode and extend them. But that can be very tedious and time consuming. There we go. Okay, so that took me a little while to do that. I'm going to undo because there's a better way. So if I go into my multiple line connect, so if I've selected this mode, I can see, though, it also tells me how it works. It's very helpful in that way. So if you're gonna have to, this one there's 2 ways of doing it. So always look at the instructions. They're very helpful. So it says, first select boundary object, then select the objects to extend. So I want these lines to extend. Those are the objects that I want to extend to this boundary. So first I'm going to select the boundary object. So there, it's highlighted. It stays highlighted once I've clicked and selected it. Now I hover over these lines, and as I hover over, they are highlighted in red. So as they're highlighted, I can click, 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 and it extends it all, snaps it right to that bounding object. Okay, so that's the multiple object connect mode. Now, of course, there's another way of doing things. If I use this Connect Combine tool, that's the mode that I'm selecting. Before I do that though, I'm gonna go in using my selection tool or pressing X, and I'm gonna select these 3 lines that I want to extend. I have them selected. Now I go into, Now I go into my Connect Combine tool. I use my single object connect mode, and I can see that it says Alt Option key to connect multiple units is what it's going to say. Multiple selected objects. So I have multiple selected objects. If I hover over those objects, I can see that they highlight in red as individual objects. But if I press Option, as I'm over those, it selects all 3 of those objects, or highlights all 3 of those objects. I can click and extend, and then I've got another way of extending all those lines all at once with one operation. Okay, so these are ways of extending. I could also want to trim my objects. So in this case, I can use I want to trim all these objects. So I could use my single object connect mode. and just go through and trim off each. So that's one way of doing it. Okay, so instead of using my trim, that's not really much more efficient than the trim tool, but I can also go in and use my selection tool. I'll do those ones and use my Connect Combine tool. Remember, if I have to, there are multiple objects that are selected. If I press Option, it highlights all of them. And I want to, right. Now this, because we're at an angle and some of them are, remember how you have to specify left or right, right? So in some cases, this line where I'm clicking is to the left, and that one doesn't do it. So it works for some of these, right? Because it's at an angle, so it triangles and references in it doesn't work in isometric, the tool. It's like, okay, this is left or right. So some of them worked in this case. If I go, it's a bit of a cramped quarter. You can, in this case, I would just use the one, use that one option and then trim off. Oh, and there's duplicates under here. So that messed things up. That's actually what's going on too. So try those tools, both extending and deleting portions of your drawings. Try the multiple object connect mode and the single object connect mode using the option key, and